The CEO of a multi-billion-dollar tech firm froze in disbelief when her 72-year-old mother was forcibly removed from a first-class seat on a flight she had paid for herself. Moments later, airport security realized too late they had just humiliated the woman who held the keys to a $5 billion partnership that would have saved the airline from financial collapse. It was supposed to be a peaceful trip. Mary Johnson, a 72-year-old retired school teacher, had planned everything down to the last detail. Her daughter, Veronica Johnson, insisted that she fly first class, wanting her mother to be as comfortable as possible. Veronica had even personally booked the ticket through her corporate account as a small thank you for all the sacrifices her mother had made over the years. Mary wasn't one to ask for luxury. She had lived most of her life simply and humbly, but she was proud of her daughter and accepted the gesture with a grateful smile. On the day of the flight, Mary wore her Sunday best, a neatly pressed dress, a pearl necklace, and her favorite shawl. She moved a little slower these days, but her eyes were still sharp and kind. She arrived early at the airport, went through security like everyone else, and quietly waited to board her flight. When it was time to board, Mary handed her ticket to the agent and made her way to a seat in first class. She settled in, buckled her seatbelt, and took out a small paperback novel to read. She had only just opened the book when two security officers and an airline staff member walked down the aisle toward her. They stopped at her seat and asked to see her ticket again. Confused but polite, Mary handed it over. The staff member looked it over, frowned, and said there was a problem. They claimed the name didn't match the ID or that the ticket had been flagged as potentially fraudulent. Mary calmly explained that the ticket had been purchased for her by her daughter, that everything was in order, and that she had gone through security with no issue. But the staff didn't seem interested in explanations. Passengers around her began to stare. Whispers spread. Mary's heart began to race, not because she had done anything wrong, but because she had never been treated like this before. She was asked to gather her things and come with them. Slowly, trying to hold her dignity, she stood up and followed them back down the aisle. No one said a word to defend her. No one helped. She was led back into the terminal and told to wait while the matter was looked into. They didn't offer her water, didn't apologize, and didn't explain further. She sat alone, confused, embarrassed, and on the verge of tears. After nearly an hour, a manager finally came over and said there had been a mix-up, and that she was free to reboard, but by then, the damage had already been done. Mary said she didn't want to fly anymore. She was too upset. Her hands trembled as she pulled out her phone and called her daughter. When Veronica picked up and heard her mother's shaky voice, something inside her snapped. Mary tried to downplay it, but Veronica asked for every detail. She listened quietly, her tone cold and still, and when the call ended, she already knew what she was going to do next. When Veronica Johnson ended the call with her mother, she sat still for a moment, her phone resting in her hand. Her office, usually a place of calm and control, now felt like it was holding its breath. She stared out the window at the skyline, her mind racing. Veronica wasn't the kind of person who acted on impulse. She had built her tech company from the ground up, turning it into a global force by staying focused, strategic, and fiercely professional. But what she had just heard from her mother wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a violation, a humiliation. Her mother, the woman who had worked 2 jobs to raise her alone, who had taught her everything about grace and resilience, had been pulled off a plane like a criminal. And why? Because she was black and elderly and didn't look like someone who belonged in first class. Veronica replayed every word in her head. They said my name didn't match. They said the ticket looked suspicious. They didn't listen. Her hands tightened around the phone. She knew her mother wasn't exaggerating. Mary Johnson had never asked for anything. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't complain. That made it worse because it meant things had to be truly awful for her to even call. And the airline had no idea who they had just mistreated. Just 2 days earlier, Veronica had sat at a long glass conference table with that same airline's executive team. They were desperate for the $5 billion tech deal. Her company was offering new digital systems, upgraded in-flight networks, and AI logistics that would save them hundreds of millions. The deal had been months in the making. Contracts were almost final. All they needed was her signature. Instead, they had dragged her mother off a plane and treated her like a problem to be removed. And now they were about to find out the cost. Veronica picked up the phone and called her legal team. Her voice was steady, but her message was sharp. We're pulling out of the deal. Today, make it official. And do not respond to any calls from the airline. Not one. There was a long pause on the other end. Veronica, are you sure? Her head attorney asked. This deal is massive. This could reshape their entire future. Veronica didn't hesitate. They disrespected my mother. There's no future after that. She didn't send an email. She didn't make a public statement. She didn't need to. The next morning, a formal letter was delivered to the airline's board, terminating all agreements and negotiations. It was short, clean, and final. Within hours, panic spread behind the scenes. Executives who had once smiled at her across the boardroom table were now scrambling to understand what had happened. Phone calls were made, voicemails were left, assistants were begged for a meeting. But Veronica wasn't answering anymore. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need revenge. She just needed them to feel what they had made her mother feel: powerless, ignored, and unimportant. And now, $5 billion was gone because of one act of disrespect they would never be able to undo. The fallout began quietly at first. The airline's executives sat in their sleek conference room, scanning the terse termination letter that had arrived that morning, trying to piece together what had gone wrong. Confusion quickly turned to anxiety. There had been no warning, no complaints, no negotiation, just a complete, irreversible shutdown of the $5 billion partnership they had been counting on. The deal was supposed to revolutionize their outdated systems, bring them back into competition with younger, more agile carriers, and secure their future for the next 2 decades. Without it, they were left exposed, clinging to patchwork tech, rising costs, and a crumbling public image. By noon, their legal team was in full panic mode, trying to reach Veronica's office through any channel they could find. They sent emails, called assistants, even tried to connect through mutual board members, but the response was the same. Everywhere, no comment. The silence was deafening. It was then that someone in the room pulled up the incident report from the airport. The words "passenger removed for ticket discrepancy" were vague, but the name on the report made everyone freeze. Mary Johnson. A quick search confirmed it. She was Veronica's mother, and suddenly it all made horrible sense. The executives sat in stunned silence, the weight of the situation settling like a stone in their stomachs. They hadn't just lost a deal, they had insulted the one person in the world, Veronica. Johnson would never forgive anyone for mistreating. The news hadn't hit the press yet, but internally, everyone knew it was only a matter of time. Someone had already leaked the connection to a few industry insiders, and whispers were spreading fast. Racial profiling. Elderly black woman humiliated. Mother of CEO pulled off plane. Each rumor added fuel to the fire. In investor circles, trust started to waver. Stock prices dipped slightly, then more noticeably, as shareholders began to sense trouble. Meanwhile, inside the airline, blame flew in every direction. Executives demanded names. Who made the call to pull her off the plane? Why wasn't this flagged earlier? Where was the apology? But the truth was simple and ugly. No one questioned it at the time because it was routine. A quiet black woman, in first class, raised suspicions by merely existing there. That's all it took. As hours passed, a desperate apology letter was drafted, reviewed by legal, and sent to Veronica's office. It never got a response. A few bold executives tried to show up at her company headquarters unannounced but were turned away at the front desk. The message couldn't have been clearer. Veronica didn't need headlines or lawsuits. She had something more powerful. She had withdrawn, and that silence echoed louder than any press conference ever could. Inside her company, her employees rallied behind her decision, proud to be part of a business that stood for something real. Outside, the airline's reputation began to fracture. What had started as a quiet internal blunder was now a full-blown corporate crisis. And deep down, every single executive knew they hadn't just lost a deal, they had failed a test of humanity. Veronica never once addressed the incident publicly. She didn't call a press conference, didn't tweet, didn't leak anything to the media. She didn't need to. The story was already alive. Whispers had turned into headlines, and headlines turned into outrage. Civil rights organizations picked it up. News outlets traced the timeline, uncovering how a respected elderly black woman was wrongly pulled off a flight, only to later be identified as the mother of the very CEO whose partnership would have rescued the struggling airline. People were furious. Talk shows debated the racism buried in corporate systems, and social media exploded with support for Veronica. Her quiet refusal to speak became the loudest protest of all. Investors began pulling out. The airline's shares tumbled. Internal reviews were launched, but no amount of PR spin could clean up the damage. What mattered now wasn't the official story, it was the truth people had already seen with their own eyes. A company that had disrespected a woman who had done nothing wrong and then paid the price for it. Meanwhile, Veronica kept working. Her company, already a giant in tech, soared higher than ever. Other major clients approached her, not just because of her brilliance, but because of her values. Executives, board members, and CEOs, many of them quietly expressed admiration for what she had done, not out of revenge, but out of principle. She had drawn a clear line. Respect isn't negotiable, no matter the price. At home, Mary was slowly recovering from the emotional toll of the incident. She didn't like being the center of attention, and she certainly didn't enjoy the media spotlight, but she knew something had changed. Her daughter had stood up for her in a way that felt bigger than just family. It was a message to the world. One evening, the two sat quietly on the balcony of Veronica's penthouse apartment, watching the city lights flicker below them. Mary sipped tea while Veronica scrolled through her tablet, reading yet another headline about the airline's falling stock. "They're still talking about it," Mary said softly. Veronica smiled, but her eyes stayed on the screen. "Let them. Maybe someone's finally listening." Mary reached out and gently placed her hand over her daughter's. "You didn't have to do all this, baby." Veronica looked at her mother, this strong, graceful woman who had taught her dignity, discipline, and how to move through a world that didn't always make space for people who looked like them. "I know," Veronica said, squeezing her hand. But I wanted to because you deserve better. We all do. And with that, the story closed not with a lawsuit or a fiery press statement, but with quiet power, the kind that rewrites the rules without needing to raise its voice. Veronica had not just protected her mother, she had shifted the conversation. Across boardrooms and airports, people were thinking differently, speaking up, and paying attention. One act of disrespect had cost a company everything, but it gave a movement something far more valuable, a reason to demand better. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and drop a comment with your thoughts. Subscribe to the Black Struggle for more powerful stories that need to be heard.